Doc, you have a second area of expertise other than resurrection, near-death experiences, or NDEs. Well, start off, tell us what an NDE is.
Well, you know, some people think they're responding to you and they're going, yeah, but that guy's not dead. I'm going, hey, did you hear the name? Near-death experience. A near-death experience, it can be in other situations, but most of the time the person is close enough or just prior to entering a situation. Oftentimes the definition is a situation from which they could easily die without better care than they're getting right at this moment.
Okay. All right. So sometimes I've heard you say about a flat line on an EKG, flat line on an EEG. What's the difference?
Well, they're sort of theoretical, because almost never does somebody have, many times don't have either one hooked up, but rarely do people have both hooked up. But an EEG is brain waves. An EKG measures heart.
Okay.
So if a person's in a lot of trouble, you on one or both, you can see it on these machines. And we have this word flat line, which is not always to be taken literally. But when a person has cardiac arrest, they could be having data on the machine with their heart not working.
Okay, so now a near-death experience, they have some sort of an out-of-body experience when they're near death or have already died?
Often a near-death experience is accompanied by an out-of-body experience, which means it's like, hey, I wasn't monkeying with the occult or something. I was just up above the table, and I looked down on myself, and I saw myself, and I was XYZ, and I didn't look very good. In fact, at first I didn't know it was me. Then I thought, boy, that dude's dying. Then I realized, wow, it might be me. And the reason I think they don't recognize it, you go, how do you not recognize your face? Because if you think about it, we are where our consciousness is. So if I'm up on a ladder looking down at somebody in a bed, I'm where my brain is. I'm where more specifically, where my mind is. And if that happens to be me, whoa, why am I up here? And that starts your questions.
All right, so there have been cases, reports where people come back from being dead. Mm-hmm. They have a near-death experience. They report being in heaven or hell, right?
Well, yeah, not how far they go, but there's millions of overall reports.
Okay, so, I mean, tell us a couple.
Well, I take it you mean evidential ones.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people go, well, hey, yeah, ha, 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 I've hallucinated too, or yeah, that's when I was on this drug, or that's back when I was a teenager, you know, and people make jokes. But what you're looking for is evidence in a state where you're not conscious, or better yet, if you are under a general anesthetic, not filling a cavity, but if you're under a general anesthetic, or you have had a cardiac arrest, and your brain, in a cardiac arrest, your brain is not functioning according to the machines in seconds later. But let's say you notice something, and you don't care less about what the machine says. You are looking out and you say this or that, and you report it. Let's say there's a police report. Let's say you overhear a conversation. Let's say someone says something really crazy about you, and you can report later what they said, but you were out. And they'd say, no, I'd never have said that out loud. He couldn't have heard me say that, because I never would have said that about anybody. It was really mean. But the person reports it later. I mean, there's indeed jokes. There's indeed...
I know, but give us an example.
Well, okay, here's an evidential one. One lady said she was one of these out-of-body cases. She's up above the bed, looking down. And she said, as she said later, she said, I'm obsessive. I'm OCD. I'm obsessive compulsive. And I looked down, and there's this machine above everybody's head, 6 to 8 feet high in the room, a medical machine. And there was a number on top, kind of a riveted number, and there were 12 letters on it, or numbers. And she said, I memorized it. And as soon as she comes to, she tells the nurse who's there, hey, the number is 16789, whatever the number was. She gives 12 numbers and letters. And the nurse thought, that's pretty strange. She copies the number down. There's another nurse there, another witness. And a few days later, they're moving that machine out of the room, and the nurse goes, whoa, 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 get a guy up there on a ladder. And the guy looks, compares the number that she got a couple days ago. Number's exactly the same. And the woman said, I was looking down on top of the machine from above, and it was specifically 12 digits, either numbers or letters.
Wow. Wow, that's pretty cool. It's like there's no way she could have known those numbers ahead of time.
Well, you have to talk to a mathematician and get the odds. What's the number, especially if there's numbers and letters, what are the odds that you would hit all of them in the right sequence? You go, well, you're saying that later. No, because she told the nurse copied it down, they moved the machine days later.
Well, maybe she snuck into the hospital days before and then planned her own death.
Right. Right. She wasn't dead, so. But here's the problem. There's hundreds of these tales, and there's dozens of them are highly evidential. I mean, one story is this doctor said, well, we're going to have all the information because that machine was running. And the lady said, the machine wasn't running. She said, the machine was running. It was in the room. And she goes, I was looking down on it. The machine was there, if that's the one you're talking about, but it wasn't plugged in. And the doctor goes down and checks and goes, darn, you were right. The machine wasn't plugged in. One guy went through a wall because there's surgical wards. He watches a guy in the next surgical ward having his leg amputated. And he gives a description of what happens when you cut somebody's leg off, what you do. So some weird ones and some highly evidential ones.
But his testimony of that, I hear it didn't hold up because he wouldn't have a leg to stand on.
He didn't have a leg to stand on? Is that right? You think about that all night?
Yeah. So you'd mentioned to me once about something like a person being dead for a while, or they met someone who had been dead for a while.
Yeah, because often when people have these near-death experiences, oftentimes the longer you go up and away to quote-unquote another world. You know, I say teasingly in lectures, you visit Narnia, and you're near death, but maybe you meet with your grandmother or you meet with your father. There's one article that has 27 of these cases, and let's just say, I'm just making a type of scenario up, there's a number of them like this, and the father says, son, hate to tell you this, man, but your favorite cousin, Bob, he just got killed, or he's going to be killed in 2 days. You're going to get a telegram, Bob died in Afghanistan. And you come back, and they're taking care of you in the hospital. Nothing's happened as far as anybody knows. 2 days later, you get a telegram, Bob died in Afghanistan.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
But he's dead. He's been dead maybe for 1, 2, 3, 10 years.
What would you say to the person who says, well, what about Hebrews 9:27? It's appointed unto man once to die, and after this the judgment.
I don't mean to laugh like it's just, but to me it's kind of a flippant thing. It's just a comment. Sometimes Christians throw verses out. It's appointed unto man once to die after the judgment. Well, according to Christians, judgment hasn't even happened yet. I mean, that could have been 50 years ago. That could have been 500. That could have been John Calvin and the story that we have these kind of stories in old books. There's one in Plato. So that's not even happened
A near-death
yet.
experience?
Yeah. Well, a story like,
Okay.
And the guy supposedly visited hell and heaven. At least a bad place and a good place. So, yeah, what I mean is, on Christian definitions, that's not the judgment they're talking about. So what happens during those years? And the inevitable response is, I don't know. Well, then don't tell me what heck could happen and not happen. You don't know. You know.
So, I mean, this stuff is definitely interesting, but what got you interested in NDEs?
What got me
what
interested?
value do you think they offer us?
They're highly valuable to me. Well, first of all, from an atheist viewpoint, when you read Bertrand Russell and many atheists, the 1-2 punch is God and afterlife, God and immortality. If you have these things, you're on your way to talking about meaningful religion. And so I like the afterlife part for this reason. I've specialized all my life in resurrection. I mean, I interest in other topics, but I really never move very far from resurrection. And if there purports to be a realm of which the resurrection is a part, i.e. the afterlife, and the atheist says, yeah, but you got a little problem here. You want me to believe in the resurrection evidence and another world that we call Oz or Narnia. I'll go, well, what if, according to a recent book by medical doctors published by State University Press, up to 30 million people in Europe and North America alone have claimed to have had near-death experiences or near-death phenomena. All right, so a lot of those are storytelling. Right, so now we're down to just 10 million. Could 10 million people have looked over the other side? Could anybody have looked over? Could they have seen the Narnia? You know, if there's another world and it involves an afterlife, I want to know about it, because that's the realm that supposedly Jesus visited. And I will tell you this, when people have near-death experiences, even I've talked to many, even the non-evidential ones. Met a guy the other day. He said, my wife delivered a child. She was up, and she saw it, and she came back. And he goes, I'm going to ask her what she thinks now. He emailed me the next day. He's a PhD, a candidate in another school. And he said, you know what my wife said to me? I said, what? He goes, my wife said, I will never fear death again because I've seen what's beyond. You go, well, you weren't dead. Yeah, I know, but I looked over. You'll know. If you look, you'll look over. Well, I'm interested in a world where you look over, because that's a world where Jesus was supposed to have visited. So I want to complete my picture of resurrection.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a pastor named Don Piper, not John Piper, the other pastor, but Don Piper.
Mm-hmm.
He was a Southern Baptist pastor,
Mm-hmm.
and he had a near-death experience. I mean, he was dead for 90 minutes, and he wrote a book, 90 Minutes in Heaven. There's a movie out on it, but I read that book to my mom when she was dying back in 2013, and it brought such comfort to her when he talked about his experience in heaven. Well, through my friend, Gary Hamrick, same initials as yours, Gary Hamrick, he connected me with Don Piper because Don was his friend. He'd known him and worked for him before. And so we arranged, and Don called my mom just a couple of days. I mean, I think he talked to her on a Wednesday or a Thursday, and my mom died Saturday morning. And it was, I think it was a Wednesday at 6 o'clock in the evening, and he called, and a bunch of us were there in the hospital, inpatient hospice room, and he talked to her for 11 minutes. And he said, and my mom's name was Joy, and he said, Joy, I know that you're probably thinking right now, I'm going to miss my family. Let me tell you, you're not going to miss your family, because it's like there's not going to be any time. You know, it's like you go to heaven and you'll turn around and there your family is right there. And he says, I can tell you that the joy, the colors, and the sounds, the music that you hear is amazing.
You hear this from everybody.
And he said, I'll never forget this. He said, so look, he says, I love my family, but I would trade places with you in a flash without thinking about it if God would let me. So he said, you have nothing to worry about. You have everything to look forward to. He said, enjoy. I will see you at the gates.
You know what,
one more thing. She had been asleep because of medications, because of nausea and pain since the previous day.
Right.
And she woke up for this. Her eyes had been so big during these 11 minutes. And when he said that, she mustered up all the energy she could have, and she said, thank you. And those were the last words she ever said.
Really?
And it's like, that was just so cool.
Mike, you know my story because you were at the funeral, but in 1995, I'm remarried now, but in 1995, the wife of my 4 children, the mother of my 4 children, died. And she had an experience just before she died, but that's not what I would bring up. It's what I told my children. From reading these kind of stories like your mom's, I told my kids, weep for yourselves, but don't weep for mom. You don't have that burden because mom wouldn't come back even if she had a chance. Now, I believe that from the NDEs alone, but Paul says twice, 2 Corinthians 5, Philippians 1, Paul says, I prefer to die and be with Christ. And a lot of the old commentaries, way before NDE studies, think that when he was stoned at Lystra, that corresponds to that 12-year sequence in 2 Corinthians 12, where he has what appears to be a near-death experience. He says, I want to go back, I want to be there. So I think it's a totally biblical response. I think it's fantastic.
That's awesome.
You interview people, you'll believe too. You have to, and here's what they'll say to you, Mike. I have nothing to prove to you. I don't care if you believe me or not. I'm secure. I'll never fear dying again. I've been there. And you go, wow. And you hear enough of those, it's like, so cool. And then when you get the evidence, it's like, whoa, that's what I do for a living. That's apologetics. So it's the realm of resurrection. So that's it for me.